Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you had a good lunch. My name is Bill Nowak. I'm the former executive director of NY-GEO and currently a board member. I'm going to introduce the subject here and moderate the panel. And I want to start by saying the climate crisis is presenting us with an incredibly demanding challenge. The world energy system is the equivalent of a huge aircraft carrier that we need to turn around 180 degrees quickly. We've started doing some of the policy work necessary for this task, but a full set of decisions about how to turn the ship around need to be made in the next couple years. And change based on those decisions needs to be in full swing by the end of this decade. It's an enormous task. In New York State, the building sector is the worst emitter of greenhouse gas emissions, and heating and cooling is responsible for most of those emissions. The form of the aircraft carrier in New York State building sector largely consists of policies and regulations designed to heat with methane gas, something that made sense in some ways before we started addressing the climate crisis, but it does not make sense now. We've assembled 4 leading thinkers on what policy measures are needed to decarbonize New York's building sector. And we are going to start with Allison Considine from the Building Decarbonization Coalition.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. I know we're post-lunch, so if you're under-caffeinated, I'll try to keep it zippy. My name's Allison Considine. I'm the Senior Campaigns and Communications Manager at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. The Building Decarbonization Coalition is a nonprofit that seeks to harness the power of coalition to forge paths to upgrade and power homes and businesses with clean electricity. We seek to bring together all of the stakeholders from manufacturers, OEMs, utilities, workers, labor unions, environmental groups, to work together on consensus policy solutions to accelerate an equitable transition to decarbonize buildings. And we've been so thrilled to work with NY-GEO and the geo industry for improved geothermal tax credits, on thermal energy networks, and on policy priorities like the New Efficiency New York proceeding in New York. So I'm going to start off by sharing some thoughts on the framework through which BDC is thinking about the question of right-sizing the cost of geothermal and thermal energy networks relative to gas. And then I'm going to talk through how there's 4 movement-wide priorities that advocacy groups working on buildings, environmental justice, members of NY-GEO have been coalescing around for the past several months as top priorities for the upcoming New York State of the State and executive budget proposal from Governor Hochul. And at the end of my presentation, there's an opportunity to sign on to a letter requesting the governor include those priorities in her State of the State ask, so we invite you to join us on that, or to read more about it, which Chris will be able to share. So we are at BDC really interested in this idea of, in order to right-size the cost, we really need to examine how we're approaching the transition. I'm going to talk a little bit through what we see as our current approach, sort of an unmanaged house-by-house approach, and the shortcomings of that stand in the way of us achieving our climate goals on time, reducing emissions at scale, and really driving down the costs at scale. And I want to acknowledge there is steady progress being made here. There's hundreds of us here today who are working in various facets of the industry. But this uncoordinated approach runs the risk of letting a lot fall through the cracks, and it's tough for even one homeowner or business owner to piece together everything needed to decarbonize with hundreds of potential pain points. And I think a key issue is this approach is not really scalable at speed. And without scale, we won't meet our climate goals. It runs the risk of failing to offer a clear path forward for fossil fuel workers in the clean energy transition, and it risks perpetuating inequity. You have issues with affordability in this approach, who can afford to upgrade their home energy system at the point of failure to the most efficient technology. And it runs the risk of creating a negative feedback loop in which there are homes left on the gas system who, folks who can't afford to decarbonize, and they're going to be facing, exponentially increasing gas utility rate costs from being responsible for all of those undepreciated assets and eventually stranded assets on the gas system. But really at the heart of our discussion today, it fails to shift the economics at scale. So this is like a little bit of an illustration BDC developed with heat out of Massachusetts, sort of how our current approach is proceeding, where, somebody decides, oh, my boiler failed, I'm going to put in a heat pump. Maybe another of their neighbors does because they're an enthusiastic early adopter. Someone else has a friend in the geo industry and they heard about it and they put one in. And it's moving along, great, we're electrifying. But for everybody who's not making that choice for whatever reason, their costs are going to start rising and rising and rising. And we're going to hit an inflection point at which the fixed delivery costs on the gas system are going to make it more affordable. Right now we have, in some cases, more affordable to stay on the gas system. Those fixed delivery charges are going to get so high that it's going to accelerate that process of customers fleeing the gas system even further, which is, a potential major equity crisis. So what we would like to see instead is a neighborhood scale approach to make sure that we manage to prevent that inequity and to be able to really scale up and meet our goals in a coordinated way. This paradigm shift, I think, involves all aspects of the industry, from waste heat capture to geothermal, strategic use of air source heat pumps. Kind of all aspects of it can plug into this model. There's not one silver bullet solution. But I think if we can really shift the bucks and the approach to be neighborhood scale, and if we do that in alignment with the utilities, with NYSERDA, with the industry, and move entire neighborhoods off the gas system at once, this is where we see the opportunity to have significant cost savings, especially if we pair this approach with new rate design and cost recovery strategies. So we're trying to kind of bring a system scale approach. And, I think some of the co-benefits of this are we would have each customer, lost in my notes, 1 second. We can get cost savings in this approach through large-scale aggregated contracts. You get that certainty not just for manufacturers of heat pumps, but also for the workforce. So workforce apprenticeship training programs need that certainty to know that it's worthwhile to bring an apprenticeship class through, which is a multi-year training process, an investment of hundreds of thousands of dollars in training up that workforce. This can help deliver that certainty so that the unions that represent workers who are currently on the gas system can start to shift their training program, start recruiting folks to work in this new clean energy economy. And it would allow us to better account for the avoided costs of gas infrastructure investments and begin to quantify the grid benefits of peak shaving and avoided electric sector investments from leveraging ground source heat pumps, network geothermal, and other models of thermal energy networks. And then the last piece I just want to frame up here before I move on to the building electrification and equity platform is I think this is sort of our hope for the long-term paradigm shift New York is able to make and that we're all able to kind of effectuate together. But I think in the near term, BDC feels there's tremendous opportunity and significant cost savings right now from customers who are primarily on delivered fuels, oil and propane. We all know this. 60% of customers on Long Island are on delivered fuels. And so we would just really love to continue partnering with the geothermal industry to make sure that we're starting with that low-hanging fruit and able to deliver those cost savings in the near term as we scale to this long-term neighborhood scale approach that can ideally drive down the cost in a more significant way. So I mentioned that there's a bunch of groups who've been working together on something we call the Building Electrification and Equity Platform. This is the 4th year that this platform has been developed through a collaborative process. And what this is really is the assessment from folks who are working in the policy of what needs to happen this year that can really be achieved by the governor and the legislature and state agencies to drive the transition forward. So the first top priority is passage of the New York Heat Act to enable an affordable gas transition. This involves ending the 100-foot rule, which again will help shift the economics here. If we're no longer subsidizing gas line extensions, we can ideally unlock some of that funding to support equitable building decarbonization, as well as amending the utility's obligation to provide gas service to be an obligation to provide energy service, non-gas specific, to really allow thermal energy networks and other block-by-block, community-by-community transitions. We're also calling for DEC to set gas emission reduction limits on gas utilities. This was one of the recommendations within the Climate Action Council scoping plan of the CLCPA, and we feel there's a mismatch right now between the incentive set by a potential program design like Cap and Invest and utility incentives, given a major form of utility profit making is from capital expenditures, and a program like Cap and Invest would drive down the actual fuel, but not those capital expenditures. So we see the need for the state to show leadership here so that the Department of Public Service and the Public Service Commission can really lean in on each gas utility plan and make sure that it's on track to contribute to emissions reductions in line with the CLCPA. The last 2 points are funding retrofit readiness. If anyone was in the earlier session of Eversource's pilots, asbestos remediation and lead pipes and mold, there's all sorts of issues that are currently preventing homeowners, particularly lower income homeowners, from accessing incentives in the state. And we would like to see an additional $200 million in the state budget specifically for helping remediate those older homes and apartments of low and moderate income New Yorkers. And then lastly, we'd love to see funding for thermal energy networks at state facilities and campuses. Jeanne Bergman's going to get into this in more detail in her presentation, but there's a real opportunity for the state to demonstrate how thermal energy networks can help deliver not just emissions reductions at scale in these state buildings, but peak shaving benefits, workforce transition benefits, and there's 15 campuses accountable for 40% of the state's emissions, where thermal energy networks are under consideration and just need some funding to move to be shovel ready. So that is my presentation. Like I said, Chris has a write-up of those 4 priorities. We invite, if you are here with an organization, a business, you don't have to be, you can even sign on just as an individual, I think, but you might be at the bottom of the letter. And Chris can pass around that sign-up sheet, and we'll be launching it tomorrow to the media and sending it into the governor's office, so you can get in right under the wire. And thank you. And next up, I'm going to pass it to John, and really appreciate the chance to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. My name is John Rath. I'm Director of Operations for NY-GEO, which means I get to serve at the will of our Board of Directors. Mostly I get involved in things like rate cases, some policy statements, lots of Zoom meetings as the Public Service Commission is now putting out, I think, a record number of orders that we need to respond to. And full disclosure, some of you know I'm probably the least technical guy in this room. That's why I rely on all you people that really do understand the technology, and I thank you for giving us input when we have to submit a report that will influence the policy and the progress and the growth and the scaling of this business in New York State. So thanks, and no guarantees I won't continue calling on you. That actually has some advantages, not being the most technical guy. Let me see if I... And the reason it has advantages is because I'm talking to people that don't understand the technology very well. They kind of get the advantages when you can put it into vernacular, and so that's what I try to do. And one of the things that I latched onto right away was Aponocowism. If you know Jens, he's been talking about if you don't get it from the borehole, or if you get it from the borehole, you don't need to get it from the grid. And he's talking about, peak energy, thermal energy storage, all of the really positive things that have an economic an ecological advantage to our state. Now, certainly there is going to be some increase in electric demand as we get more ground source heat pumps installed, right? But not nearly what it would need with some other technologies, and I'm referring to air source heat pumps. What I'd like to do is just have 2 or 3 slides and talk about things you may already know, but it's what I talk to when I'm talking to advocates, when I'm talking to elected officials, policymakers, and frankly, just people I meet in the community who want to know about ground source heat pumps. The first is that if you took the money that it would take to build out our grid in order for everybody to have, you know, a air source or an alternative system, you could saturate the whole market with ground source heat pumps. You probably already know that, but that's an attention grabber. The COP, as everybody here knows, is greater for ground source, much greater than for air source, and it takes a little explanation sometimes, but generally people get it. The big one, and that's to Jeanne's comment, is that ground source heat pumps at peak times when we would use the grid for a very short time but have to invest incredible amounts of money in it, is there for us. You cannot get that, or if somebody knows if you can, I haven't heard about it. E-batteries are not doing it for us, and the ground source is 24/7, 365. I know I'm kind of preaching to the choir here. But what I see as a solution is we've got to continue to quantify the value of the ground source heat pumps to the grid. Jens, if you get to talk to him, and I think in some of his presentation, he'll show you that. I'm not going to throw out all the statistics. I spend all day trying to explain it to you, if I even understood it. How we can use the dollar savings for more geothermal installations, for constructing that borehole, for putting in the equipment, and then, as Allison said, let's get rid of that archaic 1800s 100-foot rule, or what's known as the obligation to serve. So you guys probably seen this. It's from a Brattle Group research program, and basically anything after 50 degrees, ground source runs away in terms of efficiencies, right? So if it's 0 degrees, we might as well just have baseboard electric heating. You folks most likely know that, but there's a lot of people that don't, and I think this is one of the more simpler ways I can communicate that. Another thing is that our electric rates currently don't incentivize, but rather penalize our ground source heat pump users. Let me give a shout out to Con Ed. And who's here from Con Ed? Thank you for experimenting with what's called the select rate. The select rate is a pilot program, but what we found since it's been happening is that ground source heat pump and even some air source heat pump customers are saving money. And Con Ed was also generous enough to say if people find out they're not saving money, they can go to the old rate with no penalty, but that hasn't happened, and it isn't going to happen. My hope is that other utilities will mimic or do something similar to Con Ed, and that's the kind of thing that we need to show how the grid ground source heat pumps maximize the grid electric system, all the wires, poles, etc., minimize peak demand, and keep costs lower, not only for ground source, but for all customers. And air source heat pump is not doing it. What I would ask of people here in the ground source industry, the geothermal industry, is get that message out. Call your utility company. If you're on a rate case, bring it up. But that's what we need to do to really provide an additional economic incentive to our customers. and it's easy to do for us if we can get the utilities to at least experiment. Another thing is, Bill Nowak has been working hard. We've asked for support and letters from you folks to get our New York State tax credit lifted from $5,000 to $10,000, and with refundability. Refundability means that if you don't make enough money, if your income's not high enough, that you have a tax liability, it's just like cash in your pocket. So remember that. People who won't have a tax liability at the end of the year can still take advantage of this, and it's like just subtracting that amount from their install fees. It's currently $5,000. We're working hard. We're going to ask you to please write letters, make phone calls, things like that, because there's a really good chance it can get passed. It opens up our disadvantaged communities market. It opens up the lower and middle income markets. And so it's that person-to-person contact to our governor. It's persistence from the whole industry. What I'd like to do now is just on one other point, because I worked hard to get this information. This is from, I'm quoting because it's too technical, from one of our water furnace experts who's been doing a study, and just to reinforce what we know about the efficiency of ground source heat pumps. They, water furnace, observed the performance of over 400 ground source heat pumps in Saratoga, Rochester, and New York City, demonstrated that average peak efficiencies were 5 times higher than the typical AHRI, EER, and COP ratings for air source heat pumps. I'll get that translated into more simple stuff, but some of you folks know that. All of the ground source heat pumps measured were operating and demonstrated entering water temperature and leaving water temperature changes over 1 degree Fahrenheit. So it's effective, it's efficient, and that 360 observations were taken over 60 minutes at 10-second intervals, and they're all centrally ducted systems. So if you have any need for an explanation, I can write this down for you, but don't ask me to explain it right now. Okay, thanks for listening. I'd like to turn it over to one of our strong allies, Jeanne Bergman from Sane Energy.
Let's push the down or to the right. Good afternoon. It's really wonderful to be here. I'm always shorter than I think I am. I am a policy person, and it is wonderful to be talking with industry people and to have these conversations that I've had yesterday and today with all of you, because you are the people who can make the kinds of changes we need happen, both literally on the ground, in the ground, but also in Albany and in New York City. So thank you very much for having me here. Sane Energy Project, with whom I work, our mission is to replace the fracked gas infrastructure with 100% democratically controlled, small d, renewable energy in New York State. We build every campaign through a lens of racial, social, and ecological justice. And we used to spend most of our time fighting pipelines and the fossil fuel industry and the gas utilities, for whom preserving and expanding the gas infrastructure is really a matter of corporate life or death. But we have come to understand, as you all do, that if you to get rid of gas, you need to provide an alternative that's better, that's more affordable, that's healthier, that's safer, that's more comfortable, that is more resilient, that is easier to use, and that people are genuinely happy with. And as a homeowner with geothermal, I can attest to the fact that that's how it is when you have it. So we also know that geothermal systems are the fastest way to scale up, to reduce reliance on gas. And especially something that Jens Ponekai was talking about earlier that comes a lot is in peak shaving. So one of the things the gas industries need to do is they need to be prepared to manage the demand on the very, very coldest day, very coldest minute of the year, the design day. And for that, they grossly overbuild the gas system at the expense of the ratepayers. And so we have in Greenpoint in Brooklyn, not far from here, giant tanks of liquefied natural gas in the event that we have another cold snap like we did in a superstorm a few years ago. So we want to see an alternative that provides clean and renewable heating, cooling especially now as the planet warms, as well as hot water, and to reduce our reliance on gas. So the foundation, the policy foundation for New York for getting our gas use down and our renewables up is the CLCPA, the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, which was passed in New York in 2019, signed into law by then Governor Andrew Cuomo. Not perfect, but it mandates really solid emissions reduction goals. Statewide greenhouse gases would be capped at 60% of 1990 levels, and to 15% of 1990 levels, in 2030, and to 15% of 1990 levels by 2050. So that's a very substantial decrease. However, a mandate is not necessarily an implemented accomplishment. And so the state so far is nowhere near on track. And just earlier in October, the governor, Kathy Hochul, said, oh, actually, I don't think we're going to meet it. And so, I think we should relax it. And we can't do that. Climate change isn't sitting around waiting for Kathy Hochul to make up her mind. So, oh gosh, my slide. Thank you. All right, already way behind schedule. So we have a problem. We have a great set of goals, but we don't have the tools always, the legislative and policy tools to accomplish them. In New York City, we have a comparable law, the Local Law 97, which greens our buildings, also passed in 2019. Solid emissions caps for buildings over 25,000 feet as of this year. Stricter limits coming into effect in 2030 and to reduce emissions by 40%, and net zero by 2050. And in New York, that is really being enforced. So how are we going to get to the goals we want, especially if the state isn't doing it? Allison mentioned a couple of key pieces of legislation and policy that are in the Building Electrification and Equity Platform, the BEEP letter. I'm going to pick up more on one. In addition, we want to work with the New York Power Authority, with schools and multifamily housing and municipal thermal energy networks to hasten the transition with low-hanging fruit and also continue to build the market. So the first piece of that is the Decarbonization Leadership 15 and the Renewable Capital Act. This is what Allison mentioned, the 15 state-owned properties that emit the most greenhouse gases, and also the Albany Capitol Empire Plaza. Thank you. And all of those would be renewable, and it's clear that district geothermal would be the critical piece for making all of those renewable and carbon neutral. They have some additional important features, though. State-owned properties, whether they're school campuses, hospitals, or even prisons, disproportionately serve low and middle-income New Yorkers and people of color. And so when we transition those properties from fossil fuel combustion to geothermal and other healthier, cleaner things, we are doing better by the people who use those properties. And in Albany, at the Empire State Plaza, that energy comes from a place called the Sheridan Avenue Steam Plant, which was founded in 1911 and which has been contaminating the soil and the air in that low-income, people of color neighborhood for all these years, and they are desperate to get rid of it. So great plans, but the problem is they have a 17-year timeline to do this. Like, my son just went to college. It took us 17 years for us to get him there. I think they can do this a little faster. New York Power Authority is responsible for decarbonizing those places. Interestingly, NYPA which is rarely discussed in places like this, is mandated, thanks to the Build Public Renewables Act, to fill the gap between what private developers are doing and what needs to be done, and also what the utilities through UTENJA are doing, what needs to be done. And NYPA is having a hard time finding enough utility-scale projects of solar and wind to get on track to meet the goals that they need to meet. We think that the people, the 550 people here, need to let NYPA know, and I think NYPA is committed to doing this, they're just not quite sure how to do it yet, to let NYPA know that geothermal projects are a way that they can accomplish a lot of that, because geothermal is renewable energy. Their mandate requires them to serve particularly government-owned entities like schools and public housing and government buildings and courthouses. All of those can be driven to geothermal and thermal energy networks through NYPA's incredible reach, its financial strength. It just got a AA bond rating. So we want to see, and they're also responsible for most of the transmission of electricity in New York, so this would take that burden from their shoulders. Another key thing are municipal thermal energy networks. There are a couple of cities in New York that are working on that now. They are often the they are the technologically progressive cities often, and recognize that they will save money and serve their constituents very well if they do this. And they have experience with managing and billing for water and waste utilities. They have all of the structures in place to do this. They have control over infrastructure and streets, and they don't take the additional 10% for profit that the investor-owned utilities do. So it's a way to save everybody money. Finally, there's the New York Cap and Invest bill, which is a potentially powerful tool to move buildings off gas and invest in clean energy, including dedicating 35% of that to disadvantaged communities to cut pollution and create jobs. But the regulations and rules for putting that into place are still being hashed out. We need to make sure it aligns with CLCPA, Climate Act targets, and that it does the job of implementing the Climate Act. And then finally, what comes up again and again when we talk about geothermal systems is that there is resident opposition to losing their gas stove or whatever, and there's people push back. That's because people are uncomfortable with new technologies that they don't know about. So it's incumbent on all of us to soften the soil, so to inform people what these are before we go to them with these projects in hand. And so one of the things that we at Sane Energy are doing, we're working with a large affordable multifamily housing project in our program in the East Village of Manhattan. And we're using that project as a way to reach out to a much larger neighborhood pool and encourage people to understand what the possibilities are and implement them to ensure that their residents will ultimately have clean and healthy and safe and affordable and renewable energy. Thank you.
I did it myself. All right, I'm Kevin Moravec. I'm the president of Barney Moravec Incorporated, Van He Heating. I'm a driller and installer of ground source heat pumps throughout most of Western New York. I've played in the Albany area. I've not come down here. I don't want to. There's enough good people here to do what needs to be done. And again, thank you for showing up for this event. First time in New York City, 550 people. Next year, if it's like anything like this, it just keeps growing and growing and growing, so we really do appreciate it. I'm also a board member with NY-GEO, and I focus on the drilling side of things more than anything else. I've been tasked with talking about how to scale geothermal. How do we grow it? How many people have had something break in their home? An air conditioner, furnace, a refrigerator. Everybody's had something go, right? Which person do you want to show up? The person with a tool or the person with every tool? Because you don't really know what it takes to solve that problem until you actually look at it. And we view scaling geothermal as there is no right way. Every way is part of the solution. We like to have a lot of tools in our toolbox when we go to work. Some of the things that can help geoscale up, there's NPAs, direct owner benefits versus district or U10, third-party ownership, which is kind of a real gray area. I've been an advocate of putting incentives towards the actual ground loop. It's the only thing that makes geothermal geothermal. The box in the house, whether it's air source or ground source, there's no difference. None. Correct sizing systems. That's a major piece to controlling cost. We'll talk about that a little bit. Probably one of the biggest things that we talk about and hear is removing the fear of our technology. How does it work? How many people can actually tell me how your air conditioner works? Or your refrigerator? Does it matter if you know how it works? If you know that it works? So we need to get past that fear from decision makers, engineers, architects, developers. It works. Trust us. That's why we're good at what we do. And then long-term planning in general, which I start there. And those of you that have been to these events over the years, you'll hear all of us on the board kind of saying the same message. And that little 100-foot rule seems to be a common thread amongst everybody speaking. And we talk about the carrot versus the stick. We've had the carrot for a long time. 2008 was the first federal tax credit, 30%. Boom in the industry. NYSERDA helped us in 2016, 2017, and created an incentive for heat pumps. For the box, we incentivized the box. Keep that in mind. The key to the difference here is once the stick comes down, Jeanne mentioned, we have mandates. Mandates don't mean anything. It's like assembling 11 of you randomly. We're going to go score a touchdown against the Buffalo Bills. Just go do it. There's no plan. You don't know how to get it done. Just go figure it out. And that's really where we are right now. We have a goal. We have a series of goals. We don't know how we're going to get there. There's a lot of great ideas. I'm sure we can score. We just got to figure out how many times we can score. The key to scaling is everything that is going on in these conferences. There's an ASHRAE conference going on simultaneously to this. There's items over there that are important to what we do. We need to take these conversations, put them into your own words. I can't speak like Bill or Allison or Jeanne or John. They can't speak like me. I ramble a lot. Those of you that have been in some of my things, and as you'll see right now, I like to ramble. But put it into your own words and get the message out. Because every time you have a conversation, you are advancing the overall method, the message. All these various things are carrots right now. More projects, incent the people projects in a different way. Start with the ground loop. Improve design confidence. That's what New York GEO has been doing a really good job of, is we collaborate now. We have different ways of measuring. We have different ways of sharing that information to prove that it works. We know it works. You don't have to prove it to me. We have to prove it to other people. Tax credits, third-party utility, all these are tools in the belt. Some of the various things that have been kicked around, areas where I work, we've worked with a home-by-home version of an NPA in Lansing, New York. It gives a very good incentive to homeowners in a location that they're not allowed to hook up to natural gas. They're just not allowed. And the utility is incentivizing these homeowners to get off of the gas. And it's a very popular program once people know about it. And what we see is once you do one system, they tell their friends, their neighbors, their family, and it grows organically. And right now, that's one of the best ways that the geothermal industry excels, is at organic success. It doesn't matter if I tell you it works. If your best friend says it works, well, I want that. There's district NPAs of varying abilities. You could talk to any one of the utility folks that are here. You can talk to any of the different contractors that are here, and they can give you examples of this. We don't know how well any of them work right now, which is fine. It's a measure that is slowly building another tool in the toolbox to prove that it is successful. In general, most of these solutions are rate-based. So what we're doing is many pay for the few. And that is a very, very high cost. We just don't see it because it's buried in your rate. We don't notice it. As more and more people come off of a gas infrastructure, as I think Allison mentioned, that cost starts going up. You want to be a little bit confrontational with it? Make gas $8 a therm right now. See what happens. Geothermal and air source, they're going to fly off the shelf. There will be no gas. And you know what? Make the people that can afford it pay that higher cost to make it affordable for everybody. That's what the utilities do right now. We subsidize those that can't afford it. A little confrontational. I like that, though. High cost. I don't know why I wrote CBA in this. I don't remember what I was going after on that. But there's a lot of layers that comes into what somebody sees as a developer or a utility or a ratepayer or a shareholder. I'll put a price in, and it gets inflated 70 to 80 to 100% before it gets to that building owner to drill a loop field. What I offer for $1 million, somebody's paying, whoa, really? Oh, okay, we'll move on. Which is better? We don't know. I think, again, this is more about which situation, which solution can be best served location by location, or location by location. It can be a community, it can be a home, it can be a city, it can be a block. We don't know. There is no right, there is no wrong. Let's talk about it. Third-party ownership. I don't have a lot of experience with this. I don't think industry does. We can maybe extrapolate a little bit based on what solar did. Solar exploded with the third-party ownership methodology. I don't have to put solar on my house. I can buy a plot 4 miles away and I can get the benefits. Risk reward. You know, the risk cannot be on the people doing the work. What that means is if I'm going to go do a project as a contractor, I can't eat all of the risk. It's got to be somebody else, somebody's deeper pockets. That's how we are able to do more work. It's how we're able to grow and scale. You give me a contract for 1,000 holes over the next 2 years, I'll figure it out. You give me a contract for 10,000 holes over the next 3 years, I'll figure it out. It can be done. There is no no. And we can go over this quickly. Like I said before, we have incentivized the box in New York State since 2017. The box. That's not the value. You listen to Jeanne's talk, you look at all the data, the value is in the loop. It's in that battery. And it is good for centuries. You do it once, it's there forever, as far as we know. Incentivize that. You want to grow the system, you want to make systems more affordable, put the loops in at the lowest cost for the homeowners, and then the open market. There is no real difference any place in what mechanical contractors do. You're hooking pipes to a box. Sometimes it's one pipe and it's gas. Sometimes it's 2 pipes. Sometimes it's 4 pipes. Sometimes it's 6 pipes. The mechanical guy has no understanding or care where that energy source comes from. It's very simple. Next one. Correct sizing. On the right side of this slide, these are examples that I've seen in the last year. Similar square foot buildings, look at the loop differences. We need to understand this better. You can't talk to an engineer and have them come and say, well, it's 400 tons. Well, is it 400 tons of building load or is it 400 tons of heat pumps? Because most engineers will take the heat pumps, put a safety factor onto it, and that's how you end up with, where is it, 92 versus 50. And all of a sudden, geo's too expensive. It's a very simple problem that nobody talks about. And then we don't measure, we don't evaluate, we don't go back. So there's no accountability. We need to start holding people's feet to the fire. Let's skip through this. We can talk about this if somebody wants. We talked about the fear, and I've already got the 2-minute sign. Well, people are going to have questions, Chris. Oh, perfect. So this just goes into the whole thing. It doesn't work. I've never used it. I'm not real sure. I'm uncomfortable. It's expensive. Those are all just simple objections. We're all salespeople. Handling objections is what we do. But the more we speak positively, effectively, and another word in there that I wanted to say, but we need to go out there and just alleviate these fears. It works. If you're not going to do it, I'm going to go talk to the contractor over here that is. Because in 4 years, when you're trying to catch up to him, it's too late. Now it's going to cost you more money. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to have questions now, but I would like to start just by reiterating what Allison brought up originally about the building electrification and equity platform. This is the main thing that is happening now in relation to New York State moving forward. I really hope each of you will think about signing on to that letter on behalf of your organization. Someone has the sign-in sheet. Where is it at this point? Chris is going to continue passing it around if folks can look at that, but it will also be at the Renewable Heat Now table. So please, as you leave this session, consider going to the Renewable Heat Now table and signing this letter. It's maybe one of the most important things coming out of this conference that you can do at this moment. And with that, let's get into some questions.
Is there a second mic up there?
Yes.
Hi,
Chris, we have someone all the way in the back, too, after that.
Jeanne, can you say more about what you're doing with that housing project in the East Village?
Yes, so this is a 340-unit, 3-tower, affordable multifamily housing complex that has to do, it was built in the 60s, and they have to completely retrofit everything. It is way overdue. And so they decided, there's a Sane Energy acolyte who lives there, and they decided to go for a full-on geothermal system and also comprehensive energy efficiency retrofits. So we've just started a FlexTech study that was approved by NYSERDA for funding, and are moving ahead with that. But we want to use that, and we're talking to a lot of other community organizations in the East Village as an example, not unlike actually the experience yesterday of going on tours to look at geothermal projects that either are underway or have been completed, because it is so inspiring to see what can be done and to learn about the effects of that, and to offset the feelings that Kevin was saying that people have, like, I don't know what this is, and I don't trust it, and it's probably Con Ed, and it's going to blow up my street. You know, so people need time to metabolize information about these new systems. And so we want to use the example of a system that is being built and to show people the process to illustrate it. And actually, a group from that housing complex, Christine and Jens made that space, the Eastchester NY-GEO facility in Brooklyn, in the Bronx yesterday. They toured that group first, or at least a dozen of them. And it was, people came home and were really excited. They had a board meeting last night. People are really thrilled. So that exposure is crucial to the success of this new technology, new to most people.
Hi. Oh no. Sorry. Hi. I'm just wondering, as you kind of consider the policy landscape in New York, how much, or if at all, RPS are coming into the conversation. I know a number of states, either when they pass their RPS or AEPS or CES, depending on the state legislation, they included thermal energy or ground source heat pumps specifically, or thermal energy networks in their legislation, or have made amendments. Most recently, I think Maryland and New York, I think, is in a kind of interesting situation where utilities can use thermal energy to meet their RPS standards, but they don't generate RECs, which seems like a missed opportunity. So I'm just wondering if that's like factoring in as you analyze the policy landscape.
This won't be a full answer to your question, Raina, but I do think where this is showing up in New York most sort of relevantly in our view is in the upcoming state energy planning process, as well as in some Public Service Commission dockets like the Grid of the Future proceeding. And we're sort of thinking about like, that's where some of this policy is set of what technologies is the state going to be valuing for, what benefits to the grid and to our overall, achievement of decarbonization goals. So I think there's a massive opportunity for, New York GEO members to weigh in the Grid of the Future proceeding, in the state energy plan process, which is going to have, 6 public hearings next summer, to really make sure that the values of, that thermal energy storage and peak shaving and all of those benefits from geothermal heat pumps and network geothermal are reflected in the state's plans, because I think that's then going to inform what incentives are rolled out, how, different proceedings and long-term plans kind of affect each other. But I don't know that I can get into too much more detail about how it's been assessed as far as how New York values the RECs for thermal energy.
I could be speaking off on this a little bit, but JR, we've been involved in several meetings with utilities. And we have to ask the question, why is geothermal not specifically called out in the various plans presented by the companies? We have to bring it up to them. And we need to keep pounding that message that geothermal is a very important tool in the utility toolbox that they still don't recognize.
Other questions? Chris is good at hustling.
Geothermal oversizing is rampant on Long Island. For a couple of reasons. You increase the cost, you decrease the efficiency, and the rest of the negatives. Is there any policy that people are considering to eliminate that? There's on Long Island, the utility allows the rebate to be given to other than the homeowner if you're doing a residential house, which is a negative in terms of putting in geothermal systems, because obviously the contractor or whatever is going to line his pockets. And the question is, how to stop it. You know, we put a new building code in on Long Island, that area with the building codes and the Southampton code, you're getting 1,000 square foot per ton. But most geothermal systems, they have 300 or 400 square foot per ton. So it's a major issue.
I think that incentives, you've got to be careful no matter how you look at them. I'm not familiar with, I think you're talking about PSEG out on Long Island, right? That's a little bit different than the rest of New York State's utilities. We are required as contractors to show that rebate to the contract direct to the homeowner. What's interesting is as those rebates climb, oddly enough, geothermal contract prices climb also. And so every dollar that comes from the utility needs to be returned back to the homeowner on paper and by check. That's how every other utility works. I don't know PSEG's rules. They can't just take it and hide it from the homeowner that I'm aware of. They have to show that to the homeowner as a reduced cost? Yeah, that's fine then.
Yeah, but the answer to that is they tell them they were ready. Let's say the contractor's getting it. What you hear is, oh, I took that into account. That's why we're taking a rebate. So my price includes that.
Other questions?
Mike Bayless from Energy Wise. I don't know if this is a question or more of a comment. As I see it, the way to drive geothermal systems requires four significant things that have to be done. Loop costs have to come down. We need more competition. There's in my area on Long Island, there's probably a half a dozen guys. And they're all working very hard, and they're all very good, but there's not enough. Electric rates have to reflect the benefit to the utility company, where I overheard someone saying that there was some kind of select rate at Con Ed. We need that throughout. There's the benefit to the utility company is load shedding during peak times, and they need to reflect that in the electric rate. There should be a separate electric rate for people that that go to the route of geothermal. Financing. I'm 20 years in the solar business. What you brought up, third-party financing? Well, the solar industry took off when the banks figured out how to offer financing plans that made sense, that reflected the flow of the money, with tax credits, with incentives being short-term and the rest of the balance over long-term. This is necessary for systems to be expanded. And then improved incentives. And I'll give you one simple example of an incentive that makes absolutely no sense to me. All right? People that already invested in geothermal systems years ago, and their system goes down, and they need a new system, and they're given incentives to replace it. That makes no sense to me. Why would the utility company offer an incentive for a system that has to be replaced with essentially just a slightly better system? That money should absolutely go to people that haven't put in a geothermal system.
You're not supposed to claim the incentive in a replacement of a geothermal heat pump.
But PSEC has an incentive plan for people that replace their system with an upgraded system. $700 a ton. So again,
I
an
agree, it
example
makes no
of
sense.
money that really should be going to new installations, not replacements. Those are the four things that are absolutely essential for geothermal to take off to the degree that solar did over the past 20 years.
We are at 2:30. Can we take one more quick question, and then I hope, did you have your hand up there? All right, one more quick question.
Want me to give it to her?
All right.
The only comment I would have to say about the people who already have geothermal that are getting money to put in another geothermal is they may have not have been the original homeowner, and this also keeps them from putting in an air source heat pump and removing the efficiencies of the system and taking a loop and making it worthless. So that's kind of, I think, part of the thought process on that also.
Thank you. And with that, we're going to call this session to a close. Please go to the Renewable Heat Now table. Consider signing the beep letter. Let's have a hand for our panelists. You've got 15 minutes till the next set of sessions.